Off-season drama in the NBA as Phoenix Suns owner Robert Sarver, he's been suspended by the NBA for 1 year and also issued a fine of $10 million. He's a billionaire. $10 million after an investigation into his franchise where they found that he clearly violated workplace standards in multiple ways. Let's go to some details and we'll determine why this argument has been running around news so much. So the NBA announced this punishment on Tuesday. They said that the investigation found that during his time with the Suns and Mercury, Sarver used the N-word at least 5 times, quote, when recounting the statements of others. You'll see these details unfold. Remember that one quote there. There were also instances of inequitable conduct toward female employees. That's what the NBA said in its statement, including sex-related comments and inappropriate comments on employees' appearances. So again, like I said, more details are going to come later, but the NBA was pretty generous with this whole line of, it was language that was a little bit not so kind, let's put it that way. But in light of this whole, the NBA's punishment on this, players and owners are kind of upset about it because the Suns' vice chairman and largest minority owner, his name is John Najafi, he released an open letter to Suns employees and players on Thursday calling for Sarver's resignation and as managing partner of the team. And he wrote this in response: I cannot in good judgment sit back and allow our children and future generations of fans think this behavior is tolerated because of wealth and privilege. Therefore, in accordance with my commitment to helping eradicate any form of racism, sexism, and bias, as vice chairman of the Phoenix Suns, I'm calling for the resignation of Robert Sarver. He's not the only one. He was the partial owner there. Also, LeBron James, biggest name in the NBA, and Chris Paul, biggest name, I think, on the Suns. They had some comments. They said, this is what LeBron tweeted. He says, I got to be honest. Our league definitely got this wrong. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. There's no place in this league for that kind of behavior. I love this league, and I deeply respect our leadership, but this isn't right. There's no place for misogyny, sexism, and racism in any workplace. Don't matter if you own the team or play for the team. We hold our league up as an example of our values, and this ain't it. As I mentioned, Chris Paul, he pointed this out. He said, this conduct, especially towards women, is unacceptable and must never be repeated. I am of the view that the sanctions fell short in truly addressing what we can all agree was atrocious behavior. So you guys, we have a bit of a minimal punishment, some people believe, but that discussion's been going on and on and on. But you do have 2 very big influential names from player standpoint in the NBA that are like, this is enough. We got to figure this whole thing out. And it harkens back to the words and the comments and actually the expulsion of the former Clippers owner back in the day that people are talking about as well. And they're comparing the two. So I think that also comes into this conversation.
Yeah. So both the minority owner and Chris Paul and LeBron James, they're all saying the same thing, basically. This is the league saying, we're going to tolerate this. Right. So because if you're suspending for a year, you're saying, oh, it's bad. That's a big penalty. He can't go anywhere near the Suns for a whole year. Can't go to their practice. He can't go to the facilities. He can't go to the games, etc. But you're saying, okay, so it's really bad, but it's too inconvenient to ban him like we did with Donald Sterling and make him sell the club. It's just inconvenient for us. At $10 million, that sounds like a lot of money to you, right? But let's say he has $1 billion. I think he has more. That sounds like, oh, well, that's 1% of his money. Well, is it though? Remember, if you got $100 and somebody takes $1 from you, you're like, well, I could have used that $1 to get him to buy a drink or something, right? If you have $1 billion, $10 million isn't 1%. It's nothing. You still have $990 million. You can't possibly run out of that. So that to him, that is literally nothing. It will not affect his life in any way, shape, or form. It won't affect his life 1% of 1%. Okay, so it's a bit of a joke in this context. And so should you be joking about this? Should the NBA, this is basically the NBA brushing it under the rug. And you see from the commissioner's comments, he's like, well, we have limited abilities. I mean, no, that's not true. Look at what you did with Donald Sterling, right? And he's like, this is the most we could do. No, that's the most you're choosing to do. There's no question about it. Now, guys, one of the things that's frustrating me about this last round of stories is that they're not telling you what he actually said. ESPN did a great job of explaining what he said when they first broke the story. So let me share a couple of quotes with you guys so you know what we're talking about. This isn't just like somebody calling somebody sweetheart or something, and then you can say, oh, that's bad, but it ain't, banned from the NBA bad, right? No, this is banned from the NBA bad. So let me go to number 7 first. For former female Suns employee said that he had harassed her so badly. She said, it wrecked my life. I was contemplating suicide. I mean, he would not let up, whether it was women or it was minorities. But to me, number 8 is a deal breaker. And ESPN reported this. Did he say it or didn't he? If he said this, we cannot have him as an owner in the NBA. The quote is, according to an executive at the Suns, when he asked, why are you hiring this black coach? Well, that's good. He's hiring a black coach, right? Then he said, these N-words need an N-word, meaning the N-word players need an N-word coach. That's crazy. That's nuts. So now Chris Paul is on the Suns. So, and he didn't say N-word, Sarver. He said the whole word, right? Now, what is Chris Paul going to think the owner of that team thinks of him? Well, we already know what he thinks of him. And he's got to play for that guy? Nah. You got to throw him out of the league. Otherwise, it's a joke. On Dale.
Yeah, I listen. I have my thoughts about the NBA and all professional sport franchises, which are in this country, especially basketball and football, majority black, and the way that the ownership is mostly white. It's unbelievable to me, and also scary. This is just a continuation of the NBA's high tolerance for black suffering. How these players play so hard and make so much money for these mostly white men, and then 5 years after being done with the NBA, they're broke. And this is we see the content in which they have for these players, or as he said, these N-words, is absolutely disgusting. That you get a year suspension for smoking weed. The NBA will suspend you for a year for smoking weed. So he just basically said he hit a joint, or he called someone an N-word. And he did so much more. Like he said, this woman was contemplating suicide, and the reaction from so many people. It wasn't just her. So many people that were speaking on conditions of anonymity because of their fear. That was because they work for different organizations in the NBA, were extremely frustrated that they have experienced this guy in the past 17 years. 320 people were interviewed, and none of them had positive things to say about this guy. The fact that he is there, the fact that the NBA has not banned this person. As soon as they heard about this, it shouldn't have took a year. As soon as you verified some of these comments, it should have been said that this guy was a relic and he should have been gone. But that's not what the NBA is going to do, because, like you said, the inconvenience for whiteness is way more important than the lives of women in this case, or black people.
There's a lot of people talking about this, you guys, and the comparisons between the NFL and the NBA, and how the NBA seems to be very accommodating, very aware and woke, which we'll talk about with the NFL next. But when it comes to them figuring out ways to connect to the black community or connect to their fan base, which a lot of times is younger folks, minorities, folks that actually pay attention to the sport to a degree that they have to not look like they did in the 90s. If you remember back when David Stern was the commissioner there, and there was dress codes, none of this baggy clothes, none of these jewelry, none of this outward talking, none of this music. Allen Iverson was the poster child for what David Stern did not want to see in the NBA. Once they saw that wasn't working anymore, the people were starting to go, hold on, what are we watching this sport for? They went, let's go ahead and change our direction. This is one of those moments where they think they're testing the winds. They're checking to see where the opinions are lying and whether or not they can go a certain distance. They're gauging it based off of what people will tolerate. And right now, I'm listening to NBA radio a lot. I'm listening to pundits talk about it. I'm listening to former NBA players that are talking about it. And then some of these guys who host these shows. And there's a significant percentage of people who are like, but why did he say it? And do you guys really think he meant it? And let's talk about context and all this that usually isn't talked about. It definitely wasn't talked about when the Clippers owner was going through all this. So now it's talked about in that way because you remember the response with the Clippers owner. It was, get this guy out of here. Do you see what he's saying? Do you hear how often he says it? Do you hear what's in his heart? Now, that was so obvious. For some reason, this isn't as obvious to people. But I think the NBA is seeing that and going, if we anger too many people that are okay with this type of behavior and this type of language and this type of actions inside of an organization, we might have a reverse type of turning on our league, and they're completely reading it very, very wrong. Because as you pointed out, Jank, the details of what he said and the way he treated, especially many women in this organization as well, is not being pointed out every time someone talks about this. What they're talking about is, did he really mean it? Well, did he really mean it when he showed off pictures of his wife in a bikini and said how many times she went down on him? Is that something that we were talking about when we brought this whole thing up? Because if you're okay with the N-word being tossed around, especially, again, the Suns have a black coach now, is he talking about him? Is he going to have a meeting with this majority owner here and discuss it with him? Is he going to later say, it's been a year, I think I've changed my mind? What is it that's going to change? Is he going to go back to when women do work for him? Are they going to want that job? And if they're forced to have that job because it's the only one available to them, how comfortable will they be going into work every day?
Yeah. And one last thing here, guys. You know, this is not one of those cases where it's a slip up or he did it in the 1980s and it just happened once. And, hey, look, man, restorative justice, blah, blah, blah. No. He did it countless times. To Mondale's point, 320 people they talked to, 80,000 documents. Pretty much everybody's saying the same thing. This guy's the worst of the worst. I mean, look, here's a former Suns employee, Graphic 9. He said, there's literally nothing you could tell me about him from a misogynistic or race standpoint that would surprise me. And almost everyone says something along those lines about Sarver. You ask them about Sarver, and they're like, oh, he's the worst person you've ever met. And guys, again, that quote about the N-words need an N-word. How could you NBA, what are you doing? What are you doing? That he just called all his players the N-word. He called his coach the N-word. How could you let him stay in the league? No, you're basically saying we're okay with racism as long as you don't get caught on tape like Sterling did.
Do you remember? Sorry, my last point. Kelly Loeffler, who lost down in Georgia when Donald Trump completely sabotaged all of their chances. That was great. Kelly Loeffler was one of the owners with the Atlanta Dream, again down in Georgia, and she was against the whole idea of Black Lives Matter, against the idea of us holding police accountable for the actions that they pull off on Black folks. Again, WNBA, like the NBA, has many Black women in it, so they turned and said, hey, looks like we're not going to be playing for you. And guess what she had to do? Sell that team, sell at least her interests in that team, because she was against this, which many people see as some kind of a political stance when it's actually a stance about people's lives. What does this guy feel about things like that as well? If he has no respect for Black folks enough to call him things like that, especially the way that he does business. This isn't at a cocktail party when he's telling a joke. This is him and his operations within the team. Just saying, in case we're wondering how easy it is to get rid of someone who has been, I think, a stain on their organization.
Well, he'll be saved because what'll happen is he'll spend this year, he'll go to some diversity training by some white company, and these white consultants will say he's fixed, and he'll just tell the N-word jokes at home, not in the office.
Yeah, and by the way, that quote that I keep going back to, it wasn't a joke. He
right.
Literally said it, and that's why he hired a Black person. So, to JR's point, this is at the very core of what he does at the Phoenix Suns, and the NBA, by keeping him, is saying we're okay with it
because they think everyone else is. Don't let them think that.